I remember the first time I saw him. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and the neighborhood kids were laughing and playing in the park. The sound of their joy was infectious, making it impossible not to smile. But then, out of nowhere, he appeared. A clown. He was tall and lanky, with a face painted white, a garish red nose, and a twisted smile that stretched unnaturally wide. His colorful costume looked faded, as if it had seen better days. At first, everyone thought he was part of the party, a surprise hired by one of the parents. He started performing tricks, pulling flowers from his sleeves and making balloon animals. The kids were delighted, their laughter echoing through the park. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was something about the way he moved, the way his eyes seemed to follow the children, that made my skin crawl. I noticed a few parents exchanging uneasy glances, but no one said anything. After all, what harm could a clown at a children's party really do? Days turned into weeks, and the clown began to show up at more birthday parties around town. He was always uninvited, always arriving just as the festivities were in full swing. The children loved him at first, but soon, whispers began to circulate. Kids started having nightmares, dark, vivid dreams of a shadowy figure with a painted face, creeping into their rooms at night. Then, the disappearances began. It started with Emily, a sweet 6-year-old with curly blonde hair. One moment she was playing in her backyard, and the next, she was gone. No one saw anything, no one heard anything. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The community was shaken, but it was just the beginning. One by one, children went missing. All of them had seen the clown at their parties, all of them had complained of nightmares before they disappeared. Panic spread like wildfire, and parents kept their kids indoors. The police were called in, but they found no leads, no clues. It was as if the town was cursed. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I had always been skeptical, a rational person who didn't believe in the supernatural. But something about this clown, about the way he seemed to appear and disappear without a trace, gnawed at my mind. I started to investigate, talking to parents, searching for patterns. One night, as I was going through my notes, I heard a soft, eerie laugh coming from outside my window. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned to look. There, standing just outside the window, was the clown. His eyes met mine, and his twisted smile grew wider. In a flash, he was gone, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his chilling laughter. I knew then that this was no ordinary clown. There was something far more sinister at play, something beyond my understanding. And I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Determined to find answers, I began spending my days and nights digging through local records, hoping to find some clue about the clown's origin. There had to be something, anything, that could explain the eerie presence haunting our town. My obsession grew, consuming my every thought. I visited the library, poring over old newspapers and town records. I interviewed anyone who might have seen the clown or knew someone who had. The stories were all eerily similar, a mysterious clown appearing at children's parties, uninvited, and then the nightmares, followed by the disappearances. One evening, as I was leaving the library, I bumped into Mrs. Collins, an elderly woman who had lived in the town her entire life. She saw the stack of newspapers under my arm and the exhausted look on my face. "You're looking for him, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Startled, I nodded. "Do you know anything about him?" Mrs. Collins glanced around nervously before motioning for me to follow her. We walked to a secluded park bench, where she told me a story that sent shivers down my spine. "It was over 50 years ago," she began, her eyes clouded with memories. "There was a traveling circus that came to town. One night, there was a terrible accident. The circus tent caught fire, and many people died, including a clown named Jasper. They say his spirit never left. He blamed the town for his death, and now, he seeks revenge." I listened, horrified, as she described how the clown's ghost had been seen every few decades, always around children's parties, always before a series of disappearances. "No one believed it at first," she said. "But the pattern is unmistakable. He's back." As Mrs. Collins finished her story, a cold chill ran down my spine. It seemed impossible, but the more I thought about it, the more everything began to make sense. I thanked her and hurried home, my mind racing with fear and determination. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jasper, the vengeful clown, and the children who had vanished. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know where to start. I decided to visit the site where the old circus had burned down, hoping to find some clue that might lead me to the truth. The next morning, I drove to the outskirts of town, to the overgrown field where the circus had once stood. The place was eerily quiet, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. As I wandered through the field, I stumbled upon a weathered sign, half buried in the dirt. It was charred and faded, but I could still make out the words, Jasper's Circus of Wonders. My heart pounded as I picked up the sign. Suddenly, I heard the faint sound of a carnival tune playing in the distance. It was a haunting melody that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I turned around, and there he was, the clown, standing at the edge of the field, his eyes locked onto mine. A scream caught in my throat as he slowly lifted a hand and waved, his twisted smile widening. Before I could react, he vanished, leaving me standing alone in the field, clutching the sign. The truth was clearer than ever, Jasper was real, and he was still out there, waiting. I knew I had to stop him before more children disappeared. But how do you fight a ghost? Desperation and fear gripped me as I realized that uncovering the truth was only the beginning. The real battle had just begun. Over the next few days, I could feel Jasper's presence everywhere I went. His twisted smile haunted my dreams, and the echo of his eerie laughter followed me like a shadow. I knew I had to find a way to confront him, to put an end to his reign of terror. But how? I spent hours researching ghosts and spirits, trying to find any information that might help. I read about rituals and exorcisms, about ways to banish vengeful entities. But nothing seemed to fit Jasper's unique and horrifying case. Frustration gnawed at me as I realized how little I knew about the supernatural world. Then, one night, as I was sitting at my desk surrounded by books and papers, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped suddenly. My breath turned to mist as I exhaled. I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw Jasper standing in the doorway. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his smile was more twisted than ever. He raised a hand, and the room plunged into darkness. I woke up hours later, sprawled on the floor, my head pounding. Jasper was gone, but he had left a message scrawled in red paint on the wall, "Leave or suffer." I knew then that I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. I reached out to a paranormal investigator I had read about online. His name was Dr. Jonathan Wells, and he had a reputation for dealing with the most malevolent of spirits. Desperation led me to his doorstep, and I poured out my story, hoping he would believe me. Dr. Wells listened intently, his face growing more serious with each detail I recounted. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I've heard of Jasper," he said. "His spirit is one of the most vengeful I've ever encountered. But you're right, he must be stopped." We spent the next few days preparing. Dr. Wells gathered his equipment, cameras, EMF meters, and various tools for capturing and banishing spirits. We devised a plan to lure Jasper out and confront him head-on. The risk was immense, but we had no other choice. The night of the confrontation, we set up in the old circus field, the site of Jasper's tragic end. The air was thick with tension, and every rustle of the wind set my nerves on edge. Dr. Wells arranged his equipment in a circle, forming a barrier that we hoped would contain Jasper's spirit. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew colder, and the familiar, haunting carnival tune began to play. Jasper appeared, his form more solid than ever, his eyes burning with rage. He stepped into the circle, and the air crackled with energy. Dr. Wells began the ritual, chanting in a language I didn't understand. Jasper's smile faltered, and he let out a blood-curdling scream. The ground shook, and the wind howled around us. I watched in terror as Jasper's form wavered, flickering in and out of existence. Just when it seemed like the ritual was working, Jasper's eyes locked onto mine. His twisted smile returned, and he lunged at me, breaking through the barrier. I felt his cold hands wrap around my throat, and everything went black. I woke up in the hospital, with Dr. Wells sitting beside me. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "Jasper's spirit is gone." But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Jasper had left a mark on me, a connection that couldn't be severed so easily. I could still feel his presence, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. And I knew that when he did, I would be ready. The real battle had just begun. Days turned into weeks, and although the disappearances stopped, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jasper was still out there, watching. My nights were plagued with nightmares, twisted visions of the clown creeping into my room, his cold hands reaching for me. I knew I had to stay vigilant. Dr. Wells and I kept in touch, meeting regularly to discuss any new findings or disturbances. He was confident that the ritual had banished Jasper for good, but I couldn't share his optimism. There was an unsettling tension in the air, a constant reminder that something was still very wrong. One night, as I was walking home from one of our meetings, I felt a presence behind me. The street was empty, and the only sound was the echo of my footsteps. I quickened my pace, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I turned around, and there he was, Jasper, standing under a flickering streetlight, his smile wider than ever. My blood ran cold as he took a step towards me. I stumbled back, my heart racing. Suddenly, a car's headlights flashed around the corner, and Jasper vanished. I was left standing in the middle of the street, gasping for breath, my mind reeling with fear. I knew I couldn't face this alone anymore. The next day, I convinced Dr. Wells to perform another ritual, this time with more powerful protections. We gathered a group of trusted colleagues, each well versed in the paranormal. Our plan was to confront Jasper one last time and end his reign of terror forever. We returned to the old circus field, setting up a more elaborate barrier, using symbols and artifacts that Dr. Wells assured me would strengthen our defenses. As the sun set, we took our positions, ready for the confrontation. Midnight approached, and the air grew colder. The haunting carnival tune began to play, sending chills down my spine. Jasper appeared, his form more menacing than ever. His eyes burned with a fierce intensity, and his twisted smile promised nothing but pain. Dr. Wells began the ritual, his voice strong and unwavering. The air crackled with energy, and Jasper's form flickered. He let out a scream that pierced the night, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of hell. The ground trembled, and the wind howled around us. Suddenly, the barrier shattered, and Jasper lunged at us. Chaos erupted as he attacked, his laughter echoing through the night. I felt his cold hands wrap around my throat again, and darkness consumed me. When I woke up, I was in a small, dimly lit room. My head throbbed, and I could barely move. I heard voices, familiar ones, Drive. Wells and his colleagues. They were discussing something in hushed tones, their words muffled and distant. I struggled to sit up, my mind foggy with confusion. As my vision cleared, I realized I was in some sort of underground bunker, surrounded by ancient symbols and artifacts. Dr. Wells noticed I was awake and hurried over, his face etched with concern. "We managed to banish Jasper," he said softly. "But it wasn't easy. He fought harder than we anticipated. You're safe now, but we need to keep you here for a while, just to be sure." I nodded, the weight of exhaustion settling over me. I was relieved that Jasper was finally gone, but deep down, a nagging doubt remained. The connection I felt to him was still there, a dark presence lurking in the corners of my mind. As the days passed, I began to piece together what had happened. Dr. Wells explained that the ritual had been partially successful. Jasper's spirit was weakened, but not entirely banished. He was trapped between worlds, unable to fully manifest but still capable of reaching out. I knew that as long as Jasper existed in any form, the danger was far from over. The real battle had just begun, and I was determined to find a way to end it once and for all. The final confrontation was coming, and this time, I would be ready. Weeks turned into months, and the terror that Jasper had brought to our town began to fade into a distant memory for most. But for me, the nightmare was far from over. The dreams continued, more vivid and horrifying than ever, filled with images of Jasper's twisted smile and the echoes of his haunting laughter. I threw myself into my research, determined to find a way to end Jasper's spirit once and for all. Dr. Wells and I discovered ancient texts and rituals that promised to sever the ties of even the most vengeful spirits. But there was always a risk, a price to be paid for meddling with forces beyond our understanding. One evening, as I was deep in my studies, I came across an old journal belonging to a long-forgotten occultist. It detailed a ritual that was said to banish spirits permanently, but it required a personal sacrifice from someone who had been marked by the spirit. I knew immediately that this was the answer. I had been marked by Jasper, and I was willing to do whatever it took to end his reign of terror. I presented the findings to Dr. Wells, who was initially reluctant. "This ritual is dangerous," he warned. "The personal sacrifice could mean your life. Are you sure you're willing to go through with this?" I nodded, my resolve unwavering. "If it means saving more children, ending this nightmare once and for all, then yes. I'm willing to do it." We gathered our team one last time and prepared for the final confrontation. The ritual had to be performed at the site of Jasper's death, under the light of the full moon. The air was thick with tension as we arrived at the old circus field, the moon casting an eerie glow over the desolate landscape. We set up the ritual circle, using the symbols and artifacts we had collected. Dr. Wells and his colleagues took their positions, chanting softly to build a protective barrier. I stepped into the center of the circle, my heart pounding in my chest. As the ritual began, the air grew colder, and the familiar carnival tune echoed through the night. Jasper appeared, his form more solid and terrifying than ever. His eyes locked onto mine, and his smile twisted into a snarl of rage. Dr. Wells continued to chant, the air crackling with energy. I could feel Jasper's presence pressing down on me, his cold hands reaching out to claim me. I focused on the words of the ritual, pouring my energy into the circle. Suddenly, the ground shook, and a blinding light erupted from the center of the circle. Jasper let out a scream that pierced the night, a sound of pure agony. His form flickered, wavering between this world and the next. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like a searing heat burning through my heart. I gasped, struggling to stay conscious as the light intensified. Jasper's scream grew louder, his form dissolving into the light. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, and the night was silent. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Dr. Wells and his colleagues rushed to my side, their faces etched with concern. Did it work? I whispered, my voice weak. Dr. Wells nodded, a look of relief on his face. Yes. Jasper is gone. The ritual was successful. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was quickly followed by a crushing exhaustion. The personal sacrifice had been greater than I had anticipated, but I knew it had been worth it. Jasper's reign of terror was finally over. As I lay there, surrounded by my friends and allies, I realized that the real battle had indeed just begun. Not against Jasper, but against the darkness that still lingered in the corners of my mind. The nightmare was over, but the scars it had left would take a lifetime to heal. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal in our town. The children's laughter once again filled the parks, and the dark cloud that had hung over us seemed to lift. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The connection to Jasper, though faint, lingered at the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the horrors we had faced. One night, as I was preparing for bed, I felt a familiar chill in the air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I turned to look at the mirror and froze. Reflected behind me was Jasper, his twisted smile as wide as ever. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to convince myself it was just a hallucination, a remnant of my lingering trauma. But deep down, I knew better. Jasper wasn't gone. Desperate for answers, I reached out to Dr. Wells once more. He agreed to meet with me, and we convened at his home, a place filled with artifacts and books on the paranormal. He listened patiently as I described the encounter. It's possible, he said slowly, that Jasper's spirit wasn't completely banished. Spirits like his can leave an imprint, a sort of echo that persists even after they've been exorcised. But why would he come back? I asked, my voice trembling. Dr. Wells hesitated. There may be something unresolved, something that ties him to this world. We need to find out what that is and sever the connection once and for all. We delved deeper into Jasper's history, uncovering details that had eluded us before. We learned that Jasper had a son, a young boy who had died in the fire along with him. The boy's body had never been found, and it was believed that Jasper's vengeful spirit was searching for his lost child. Determined to help Jasper find peace, we decided to search the old circus grounds once more. Under the cover of night, we ventured to the site where the tent had burned down. The place was eerily silent, the moon casting long shadows over the charred remains. We began to dig, our shovels cutting through the earth. Hours passed, and just as we were about to give up, we uncovered a small skeleton, hidden beneath the soil. The sight was heart-wrenching, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for the tragic fate of Jasper and his son. Dr. Wells performed a final ritual, one that would reunite the spirits and allow them to move on. As he chanted, the air grew colder, and a faint, ghostly figure appeared before us. It was Jasper, but this time, his smile was softer, almost peaceful. Beside him was the spirit of a young boy, his son. The two figures embraced, and a warm, golden light enveloped them. The tension in the air lifted, and I felt a sense of closure wash over me. Jasper and his son had finally found peace. As the light faded, I knew that the nightmare was truly over. The connection to Jasper was gone, and the dark presence that had haunted my mind vanished. I could finally move on, free from the terror that had plagued our town. The experience had changed me, leaving scars that would never fully heal. But it had also given me a deeper understanding of the supernatural and the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Jasper's story had come to an end, but my journey was far from over. And as I looked out over the quiet, moonlit field, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The battle had been fought and won, and the ghosts of the past had finally been laid to rest.